book out, and then I told her the title, and first of all, she loves the title. She's like, "That's the best title, Dad." And so I took it from her to do the launch today, but I have to get it signed by you to bring it home to her. So anyway, it's a great short story collection, a lot of depth in the stories. I'm going to ask you a lot of like questions about process and like and structure and just all these really cool approaches to sharing the thematic elements of the stories, which I really love. But before we get started with your reading, I just want to thank McNally's for hosting, and of course for to Plume as well. We have Charlene there, director, and so we're happy to be here, and we're going to start off by asking Amanda to do a reading from Waiting for the Long Night Moon.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to read, and this is deliberate, from Tiny Birds and Terrorists, because I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. So then you're going to have to buy the book to see what happens. That's a little too close. There we go. The last of the night shift has started to fade into the distance. It's time for food and sleep. In the field between us and those dressed for war, a small fire sputters from neglect. We watch the soldiers as they stand in a straight line, blocking the horizon, their face shields hiding their eyes. They shift nervously and look behind them every few minutes. The morning passes this way, their unease sinking into our songs and breaking the rhythm of our chants. We stand side by side, our arms wrapped around each other's waists, singing and praying. Then just before noon, as we spread food out on blankets in preparation for lunch, a crack forms in the black wall as they part. They arrived 2 days after the television called us terrorists. So many trucks that the ground vibrated under our feet, and the rumbling woke Sisipjij. 10 or 20 at a time crawling out of the back of the military vehicles, large tents erected behind them, 2 straight black lines blocking our access to the road and our access to food, shower and food. They stand so still, watching us from behind their tinted visors, their hands resting on their batons, ready for a fight that we don't want. They outnumber us 3 to 1. They carry guns and tasers, we carry drums and songs. Something's wrong. Mala stands and offers her hand to help me up. Sisipjij, strapped securely to my back on her cradle board, sleeps through the tension. Mala helps me to my feet just as the nesting birds lift out of the grass, their bodies moving together, a cloud of bird song hanging overhead before they bear left, escaping. Opposite us, a few of the men hang their heads. Their chins brush the thick plastic of their chest protectors until the one in charge yells, and they snap their heads back into place. Mala lets go of my hand, breaks away from her group, and moves to the center of the field. I need to get a closer look, she shouts back to us. I am very aware that I have Mala's baby strapped to my back, the ties crisscrossed over my shoulders and across my chest. The others behind me stop eating and stand, walking toward Mala. The air is breathless in the warm spring morning. Sisipjij jolts awake and begins to cry, frightening those on both sides of the divide, scaring the last of the birds out of the grass. One of the soldiers thrusts his hand up into the air, his black arm silhouetted against a calm prairie sky. When he drops it again, the air is filled with the sound of rushing water. The whoosh of a water cannon drowns out the sound of a crying baby. Thank you, Philip. I left mine in Vancouver, so he lent me his copy.
That is so funny too, because you probably travel a lot as well, and I never travel with my books.
Oh.
I never bring any of my books anywhere, and so I'm always borrowing my book, or I have to end up buying my book.
Oh, geez. No. I have a reader's copy, and I go through it and like cross things out that I don't like, that I would have changed, so that I don't read them aloud. There's in the very first chapter of The Berry Pickers, there's a sentence that rhymes, and it just grates on me. So I cross it out so I don't read it.
Okay, so actually, this is what I was going to ask this earlier on, but I think I'll ask it now because I do the same thing. When you're reading your work. And as I read anything that I do, almost every single book that I read from, I always self-edit as I'm reading it publicly. And I know that, so this is Waiting for the Long Night Moon was actually stories you wrote before you wrote The Berry Pickers, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about that. Like, so you usually, you look back on work that you've done before, you think about ways that you could like, you can improve them. And if you're like me, you're kind of hard on yourself for the things that you've done. So you wrote this amazing book, and The Berry Pickers, and then you decided to go back and work on a short story collection from stories you'd written previously. I'm just wondering what that process was like in doing that, and then and how did you go about like, did you have like a huge stockpile of stories to choose from? And because the arrangement is really, really quite clever, and it really drives home a lot of the thematic elements of the novel. So what was that process like for you to kind of go back and like put them all together and choose what you're going to write about, and also to edit them after you'd already written them however long ago?
Yeah, they were written quite a long ago, and I never thought so my publisher decided that they would come out after the Berry Pickers.
Right.
So, but they were written like between 2014 and 2018, 2019. And then I did have some help editing them from my mentor from the Rising Stars program, the Katarina Vermette. So I did have some help in editing a few of them and getting them to where I want to be. But I still was like, in my head, I was like, people weren't supposed to see these. I was just writing these for practice. Like, this is how I'm learning to write. So there's still one of the stories in there, I'm not gonna tell you which one, that I don't like it. I'm like, it didn't turn out the way I wanted, and it makes me queasy when I look at it. For my whole life, I'm just gonna look at this and go, oh.
I really want to know.
No, not that.
Sorry, you can tell me after. Because I mean, I didn't think, well, this one is not, this doesn't fit.
Oh,
it's all a really, really nice, like, it's a nice progression of the novel. And
yeah, there's an ordering process, which I didn't know until we chatted about ordering the stories. And then, of course, once they were all ready to go, my editor's like, we have to reorder these. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's quite intense. So yeah, your short stories, like, because there's some in there that are flash fiction that are really, really short. So they can't all be clumped together. Thematically, they have to be separated. And I was like, okay, you do you, but I want this one is my first one, this one's my last one. Because the first one was the first story I ever wrote that I was proud of. So I wanted that to be first. And then the last story ends on joy. So I wanted it to be the last thing people read, Indigenous joy.
There's really interesting too, because I thought there was, and maybe I'm wrong, but as I was reading through it, I thought there were some instances where there was like a callback or two to previous stories in the collection. Maybe you didn't mean to do that, but it seemed like you did, which I thought was.
Oh, I didn't.
So you just take credit. You just take credit for it anyway.
I did mean to do that.
I was also wondering about like inspiration for not just like the novel itself, but the structure of it, because I found it so interesting that you interspersed the longer stories with the shorter fiction, and it reminded me a lot of a couple of novels that I really loved when I was younger, and I really emulated for, like, the first novel I had to come out with for adults was also a short story collection that was all thematically linked, which was called The Evolution of Alice. And I used a similar structure where you have a flash fiction or shorter fiction story, and then you use a longer story, shorter story, longer story. And when I was working on that, I was really inspired by In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway. It was this similar structure of short, long, short, long. And I'm wondering, like, what kind of like inspired you to approach this novel with that structure? Like, what was going through your head for that? Because it was really effective.
Not a lot, really. Not a lot going on upstairs. It was basically just when I finished the story, I'd be finished the story, and it didn't matter at the length. And then I just had this collection, and some of them were shorter. And it's funny because all the shorter ones were kind of written really earlier on, because short stories are intimidating because you have to be like so concise and you have to give an entire story in such a small space, whereas the novel you can just ramble on forever and ever and ever. So it's like, okay, if I can do this, then I can make it a little bit longer. So it was like testing myself and moving myself forward. So I just had this collection in the end. And The Berry Pickers was originally a short story.
Really?
Yeah, the chapter 1. They're like, should we put it in there? I'm like, No, they could just buy the Berry Fingers, read chapter 1 as a short story. So I just had them, and there's a few that are not in there that I just wasn't satisfied with, that are still sitting in my Dropbox. But these are the ones that I was mostly satisfied with. There's that one that bugs me, but yeah.
You're giving too many teasers about that one.
And I'm not gonna tell you. I'll tell you later.
I like the candidness of that. There is really no intentionality of like structuring that way.
No.
I'm like, I just as an aside, my first book I ever did was a graphic novel, and this was black and white. And so I always had questions of like, why did you choose to make it black and white? And I always like made up answers about like, like tonality and all these matches the theme of it was a residential school story, so it matches like the darkness of it. Really is because my publisher didn't want to spend the money on the color process. Which it wasn't like that interesting of an answer. Now I tell answer. When I was younger, I was like,
I still tell it how it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I like that. So you mentioned the first story, which I wanted to ask a question about. And what I loved about the first story was maybe I'll get you to read this part because it's your book. But I loved how you flip things around in this story, and I have this page. So this is from Winter Arrives, or is it Page and Puck?
Beckaboo.
Oh, totally off. Yeah. Okay, and so you have where is it here? And paragraph 2. I wonder if you could read this part here, the second paragraph here for me.
The whole second paragraph?
Yeah, just read it. Yeah.
Okay. More women arrive this time, and children, some younger than me. The children run around like animals shouting at each other. Their harsh language is uncomfortable in my ears. Their playful shrieks are louder than the birds who try to steal our fish. Their mothers shout at them, their mouths in constant frowns, their hands raised to wipe the sweat from their brows. The women drag water from the river. The bottom of their dress is wet with mud. The buckets look heavy, bending their backs. They smile very little, these pale ones. I wonder if it's the heavy clothes and the stiff shoes that make them bad-tempered.
Right. And what I love about that is that the very, very common and stereotypical perception of like, Indigenous people from newcomers years ago was that we were the savage Indians.
Yeah.
And also, the red man and all these things. And in this story, what I loved about this story is that some of the ways in which we have been historically perceived as Indigenous people, you've taken those and you've turned them around. And so in this case, when I read like the children run around like animals shouting at each other, you're talking about settlers.
Yeah.
From the perspective of the Indigenous people of that area.
Yeah.
I'm wondering just like this thought process behind writing the story and the approach to flipping the narrative around and the effectiveness of that in this because it's like a 3-page, 4-page story.
Yeah,
so
it's only like 3 pages long.
You accomplish a lot in that time.
It started as an assignment, so is that one of those TIFA, back when it was called IFOA, and I was at one of their workshops, their week-long workshops, and David Layton was the instructor, and he said, I want you all to write a couple paragraphs of historical fiction about this place. I'm in downtown Toronto, I have no clue about this place, right? Not a clue. And everybody else was talking about all these historical figures and the buildings and all this stuff. I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to write. I said, well, there must have been Indigenous people beside this water before they came along. And I wonder what they would have thought when they first saw the settlers. So then I just went with it. I was like, okay, I like to write in first person a lot because I like to put myself into the story. Like I plunk myself down into it instead of just looking on it. So I just like, okay, if I'm a kid and I'm seeing these people and I know what my life is like how weird would it be that to be observing them from afar. So I just went with it.
Yeah, and so this story is from the perspective of a young one as well. And I just love that. And I also loved how in this story, it's the English language, which sounds clumsy and uncomfortable, and in this story, the Indigenous people's language is filled with like with poetry as they speak. I also like that quite a bit as well, that you did that.
Yeah, it was a fun story to write. But I'll tell you a funny story. A couple weeks ago, I was on a podcast, and the woman says, "So there's a lot of stories in this collection where nothing happens." And then she just went quiet. I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna have to like defend myself here." Like, what's happening? I'm like, okay. She goes, "But they're still good." I'm like, "Oh, right." And she pointed that one out. Like, nothing happens. There's no building of tension or anything. It's just a child watching the settlers. But the last line is, I wonder, my father thinks they're going to leave, but I think they're going to stay. And that's like the last line. So we know as the reader that they do stay, right? So there's a tension built there. But I was like panicking, full on like heart racing that she was just going to start calling me out for these terrible stories.
But what a great question.
Yeah, it was a great question. So
I mean, it started off not being a great question.
It started with panic. And then I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And she wanted to talk a little bit about craft and stuff.
I like that, but it was Sendak actually who said that adults read at a surface level, children read, they dig below and they pull the meaning out.
Yeah.
And I like that kind of reflects the observation of the child in this case. As the adult, it says like the adult keeps saying they'll leave, they come and they leave, they come and they leave, and there is a tension in that. I think actually a lot happens in these stories.
Yeah.
So
oh, good.
I think that she's wrong for that one. I mean, in my opinion. Okay.
I like it.
And so in the second story, you have this story that is really about water protectors, and it doesn't shy away from a lot of the violence that we've seen in a lot of historical conflicts that we've seen in Canada. Even I don't know if you were inspired at all in this story. I guess the first question is, in writing this story from something like the Oka crisis and the face-off between the Canadian military and the Indigenous peoples of the area. Was that a big inspiration for the story, or?
Yeah, though I wrote that at the time when everybody was going down to the States there to protest.
Right.
And this younger girl, Mi'kmaq girl, she was like, I'm going down, I'm joining the fight. And I was like, she is so brave to do that, and I so admire her. So I was just following her on Facebook and her time down there, and this is where inspiration comes from, right? It's just random, because I was following her and it was such an important topic. I was like, maybe there's a story here. So I started to write the story. So, but it was just what was that? Sorry, I'm getting old, so my memory's going. Remember, it was like 2017, 2018. Standing Rock, thank you. Yeah, and I just watched her, and she's packed up her vehicle. And she's like, I'm going. I need to do this because I want to make sure that my daughter knows that I stood up for her. And she was just really super inspiring. I was like, that's what I'm gonna do then. There's a girl, and she's gonna know that her daughter stood up for her. So yeah, that's where it came from. But yeah, I'm really glad to. Savvy Simon's her name, who inspired me. So from Elsipogtog First Nation.
It's very the sections that involve the conflict have a lot of really evocative imagery in them. And one of the things that really stood out to me was, I think it's Mala who has the baby that she straps to her back. And at one point, because the baby's crying, the really like rich and really like raw imagery of this baby's cries being drowned out by a water cannon was very powerful. And I also liked in the story, like you use a lot actually in the short stories themselves, I would say like the literary device of juxtaposition.
Right.
So in a lot of these stories, you're telling the main story, but you're also like juxtaposing a secondary story and weaving those together in the narrative. And so in this story, you juxtapose the water protection conflict with a grandfather and a granddaughter going into the woods to properly grieve the loss of a baby, who the grandfather says knew better than to be in this world. And it goes on to describe the water, by contrast, in this instance, as being a calming thing. And I love the contrast of the water being calming in the secondary story, or I guess the periphery, or the I wouldn't call it secondary actually, but and then in the water conflict, as the water being this used for violence.
Yeah.
And so you just want to talk a little bit about like the incorporation of juxtaposition and like some of the really cool things that you're able to do there.
Yeah, that was deliberate, right? They're there to protect the water, and then water is used against them in a form of violence. So that was deliberate. I wanted to make sure that people got that, because they're called eco-terrorists, right? When Indigenous people stand up for the land, they're called eco-terrorists, hence tiny birds are terrorists. And Sisip in Mi'kmaq means little bird, or tiny bird. So yeah, I don't know if I just always do it on purpose. Sometimes it's just what happens when you write. I get a lot of these questions like, how did you come up with that? How did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I just write sometimes. But that one was deliberate because I wanted that juxtaposition of just them protecting the water and then it being used against them in such a violent way. But in the other stories, I don't even know if I would notice if I did it.
I noticed.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, you have to let me know.
Oh, that's kind of my job though. It's amazing. I mean, that's one of my favorite stories in the collection.
Yeah, like
is that one.
It's not the one I don't like.
Oh, well, good. I mean, if it was, then I think that would probably bolster you to realize that story isn't probably as bad as you think it is, and I'm sure it's not. So after following that story, I was reading through a Golden Cross again, it's just called Golden Cross, that one, and it packs so much into a short piece. You're contrasting like traditionalism and our legends with Christianity and its symbolism, and there's a theme of our ways versus settler ways. And do you think in that approach that using that story, like what is your intention in contrasting those two things or pitting those two things against each other in that story? What do you want people to take from that? Because it's done very very well, very powerfully.
It's also from the point of view of a child too. I think those tend to be those stories, and this child is watching their mother basically being brainwashed by a Catholic missionary, and just trying to bring her back, right? This child is, like you said, children are super wise. They're not jaded yet like the rest of us, so they see things more clearly, I think, and they can see this happening. So they're trying to bring their mother back from the brink, I would say. You ask her questions, especially when I got here at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, sorry. I just thought a lot about the book.
Now I can't remember it now that I stopped. But yeah, I just wanted to show that everybody could see what was happening, right? Even the children could see that was happening. And it still is happening. I know the Mi'kmaq are super Catholic, a lot of them, including members of my own family. And we can't have these discussions. It was maybe why I write about it, because I can't talk about the traditional life and Catholicism, because they just won't. They just won't, and then they get mad at me. Some of them don't even talk to me anymore because I question that a little bit. So yeah, maybe because I can't talk about that in my family. How do they rectify that? They're very Catholic in nature with what the Catholic Church had done, and yeah, so maybe that's why I wrote about it.
Do you think that I mean, this is a philosophical question, but the Christianity, Catholicism, do you think that automatically inherently excludes traditional practice?
I don't think so, but I don't think it does. But I think in some cases it does. I'll give you an example. I know an Indigenous man. He suffered from addictions, and he came to the church, and now he's healthy and great. But he won't come to any of his. He lives on the res. He won't come to any of the ceremonies or anything because it's the devil, right? So he went kind of opposite, and I think that's dangerous. Because I know a lot of people incorporate both. I know a lot of my friends who are Catholic, but they're still very traditional, but it can be damaging too. He's on, Facebook Warriors on Facebook saying, just because we're having a sacred fire when someone passes away, that's devil worship and stuff like that. So it could go too far, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I answer that?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking too, because my father was a minister, United Church minister, but he also was a well respected elder, and
United Church tends to be a little bit different
Yeah.
than the Catholic Church, I think.
oh, sure, yeah, for sure, yeah. So I also had a question just following from that story as well, because in some of the stories, including this one, there's a little bit of like an open-ended or ambiguous kind of ending to it. And I love that, because in stories I have found, in whether they're short stories or novel-length stories, life doesn't have clean endings. And so do you want to talk a little bit about like that choice in this story and others, that you kind of have this ending that is really it's up to the reader to decide what has really happened here?
I think that's because I don't like books that tell me every single thing, like that lay it out for me, and I can't use my imagination. Then what's the point, right? What's the point of reading that book? I have a few that I despise, but I don't talk about it because that's me. That do that, right? And I don't like that. So I want the readers to insert themselves into the story or use your imagination, and what happens next, well, that's up to you. I get a lot of people ask me about the berry pickers. Well, what happens to Ruthie next? I'm like, I don't know. Well, I do. I know what I think happens to Ruthie next, right? But it's up to the reader to do that. And there's a lot of them in here where we don't know, and that story ends on like a who?
It's empty hole.
Yeah, and it's up to the reader to be like, ooh, what really happened?
Which is a great way to like make the reader active in the storytelling process, which I love that that ability to do that, because I think a lot about how that's done in comic books, where you make the reader an active participant in the gutters between the images. But in this case, you presented these stories where the reader becomes an active participant because they get to decide the outcome of the story. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Good job.
Success.
Yeah. I as a, like writer to writer, I have a couple like writing questions. And I love short stories. A couple of my favorite books are short, like In Our Times is one of my favorites. 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger is one of my favorites, short story collections. And so you write these stories, you wrote these stories, I think, prior to Berry Pickers.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about like how you found the difference between writing and executing a short story as opposed to writing a longer format novel? Do they require different storytelling approaches? Can you just explain that or talk about that?
Yeah, you have to have like, I heard this, I'm stealing someone else's phrase, it's not mine.
Is it Kate?
No, it's not hers, no. She may have said it, I don't know, but I just heard it this weekend, because I was just on 2 panels with Billy Ray Belcourt. Yeah, that was not intimidating at all. But it's the economy of words, which I love, right? You have to be so specific, and you have to create an entire narrative arc, whatever that arc looks like, in a short story. And you don't have a lot of room to do it. So I actually started writing some of the shorter ones as a bit of a challenge. Like, can I write a short story this way? I had a mentor named Toni Jensen, who's a Métis writer of creative nonfiction. And she says, try to get all of your sentences to 8 words. You don't have to get your sentences to 8 words, but try, because then you'll see all the words that you don't need anymore.
Yeah.
So I kind of look for that now, and then if I feel like I'm going on too long, which you can do in a novel, which is great, although then your editor comes along and goes, but you can do that. But short stories have their own certain challenges of just trying to get that whole story, especially when you're doing flash fiction, like trying to write an entire narrative in 750 words. It is kind of crazy. And then of course there's like 250 word stories or 6 word stories. Hemingway's.
Yep.
I prefer Margaret Atwood's.
The Baby Shoes?
Yeah, the Baby Shoes,
yeah.
Margaret Atwood's is funnier though. Do you know hers? Her 6 word story.
I think so. Yeah. You can tell.
I wanted him, got him, shit. And that's 6 words, but it tells an entire story, right?
Right.
So that's quite brilliant. So I was just kind of inspired when I was at IAIA to try some of these and get that. See if I could actually do and get a narrative down. But I always thought The Berry Pickers was a short story, but it was like, but it doesn't have an ending. You just leave it, so it has to be a novel. And for 2 years I said, no, it's not, it's a short story.
Yeah.
And then I just, well, fine, I guess it's a novel.
It doesn't have to have an ending either way.
No, it doesn't, but people just want it more. People still want more. And someone asked me if I'm going to write a sequel about May's life, about the parents' life. I was like, no, those characters are done.
Right.
But if you have something in mind that you think, you can, in your imagination.
You gotta start having people write fan fiction.
Oh, that would be so weird.
My daughter would like you to write a sequel to The Berry Pickers.
I would say no, but you never know when creativity is gonna flip on,
Yeah.
5 years, maybe there will be, but right now I have no intention.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna start taking questions in a few minutes. I had a couple more questions. This one is about the 3 billion hearts.
Oh, 3 billion hearts.
Yeah, which is I think it's the most emotional story of the collection. And one of the lines that really struck me was they think people get lost in the woods, but it ain't true. People get lost in cities. I love that line so much, and the contrast between city and the land. And the land is like, I think in the novel itself, the land is a character in this collection. Can you talk a little bit about that and the choice to use the land so much in this story collection, and what kind of role you think it plays, and not only in our lives as Indigenous people, but to the stories themselves?
Yeah, again, I'm gonna steal thoughts from someone else, because I just write about, and the land is automatically in there. So I don't know if it's in our DNA or something. But Michelle Porter, another one of your mentees, Michelle Porter, if you don't know her, you should. Her book, A Grandmother Begins a Story, is brilliant. She's Métis too. She says that it's just a product of who we are as Indigenous people, that we write land as character. I was like, that's the easiest answer to that, and I'm going to use it for like forever, because it is, and it's so important. You can't have a relationship in the world without a relationship with the land, right? In Mi'kmaq, it's called Imsipilgama, which means all my relations. We all have that phrase in our languages. So you just have to. It has to be there. It has to be a part of the discussion.
Yeah.
It does play a big part in a lot of the stories.
A lot of the stories, yeah. And this one, it plays a huge role. And one of the most beautiful passages in the book, I think, I'm going to turn to it because I have notes on what I want. I want to, if you wouldn't mind reading another little thing.
No, I gotta get my old lady glasses on.
Yeah. But from She Shrugged, this maybe just, this to the end of the, maybe there.
Okay.
Yeah.
She shrugged. You're a woman of the land, a woman of the trees and the lake. You belong to the grass. You'll feel it in your bones someday, in your DNA. She looked at me and I nodded. But until then, I want you, I need you to promise me you won't forget this. She sat down on a rock jutting out of the water and took off her shoes and socks. The rain was coming down steadily, playing the leaves and the top of the lake like a piano. She was 44 when I was born. She'd been told her entire life that her ugly face and feisty nature meant no man would ever want her. I don't think they ever stopped to think that maybe she didn't want them. I promise, I whispered, leaning on a tree and taking off my shoes and socks. She reached over and took my hand, and we walked towards the water, the mud squishing in our toes and in the cold water wetting the hems of our jeans. We didn't walk far, just stood there in the rain, our feet in the lake, the rain showering us. Good medicine, she whispered. Yeah. So the story is about a girl who's moving to the city for school, and her mom is afraid she's going to lose her to the city. And just wants to make sure she remembers that she is part of this landscape and that she can't really escape it.
Yeah, I didn't have a question, but I wanted you to read that just to show off the novel.
Oh,
it's really good. But it's also like a land-based passage as well, so it did connect to.
And that whole story, it starts with not the happiest place, but it does start with land and end with land.
And not to provide a spoiler, but near the end of this, I have to, but near the end of it, quite poignantly, she's returned to the earth.
She is, yes.
Right, and so and my question is more of like for you, and I think it's probably a question I would ask Kate and myself as well, and I would ask myself the question because I question myself all the time, but not anyway. You deal with all of these incredibly difficult subjects, including this story is probably the most difficult of them.
I actually considered pulling it from the collection
because it was so So hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really hard story to read too. It's important to read it, but it's hard to read it. What is the process for you for self-care when you're tackling themes that I think probably hit very close to home?
Yeah, walk away. I do
Yeah.
that a lot. Just when you finish something like that, just walk away from it. And sometimes for a long time,
Yeah.
right? So you can walk away from that for like 2 years and just be like, okay, I can't do that right now. I have a lovely family who keep me grounded. And I can just go and be with them, which always brings me joy. My nieces and my nephews, and they all live across the road, so that helps. Yeah, just making sure that you step away from those topics, and just take time to not let it get to you. Although it should get to you, to be honest, like, because these are important topics. We should be talking and thinking about them. But when you're writing that much, and that one was hard. Like, I did literally consider pulling that from the collection.
Right.
But someone told me I shouldn't. Yeah.
Oh, that was Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She helped me on that one, because that one was rough.
That's a rough one. I mean, it was a rough one to read. I mean, it's someone with 3 daughters, and yeah, I mean, that's, but it's, again, it's, I think the more you put into your work, which obviously you did here, and the more people get out of your work, which is what, I think what the intention is.
Yes, that is the intention. I had an interview with Tom Power a couple of weeks ago, which I said in Nebraska, and nobody was excited by that. I mean, like, there's 175 people in this auditorium in Nebraska, and I said I had an interview with Tom Power, and everybody's like dead quiet. I'm like, if you were Canadian, you would be excited about this. And he said, did you write these stories thinking that people might eventually look for the truth, or something like that? I'm paraphrasing him. Like, no, but that's amazing to think about, is that people might read this story and think about the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and go do the research and inform themselves, and maybe do something, try to start to do something about it. It's like, if even I can get someone talking about it or thinking about it with fiction, then I feel like I've succeeded somehow.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes, and I thought I would pause. I have a couple more questions I could ask, but I would pause to see if anybody out there has a question for Amanda. There's one. He's gonna run a mic to you. Usually I'm used to watching John run around. Yeah.
Hi. I just finished The Berry Pickers last week and became very obsessed with it. And I didn't know it was a short story first, and I'm curious what the process of extending it was, because nothing feels like out of place or like it wasn't meant to be there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so it took me 4 years to write. 2 years the first chapter, and then 2 years the rest of it, because I was convinced it was not a book, and I was just tinkering with this short story, trying to figure it out. But once I finally gave in to every single person who read it telling me it wasn't a short story, I just sat in front of a blank screen for a while, and I wrote an outline. And originally it was only Jo. There was no Ruthie's story. She was there in the beginning, and then she was there at the last chapter. And then I was about 3 chapters into Jo's, and there was just this nagging voice in my head saying, I want to tell my story. And I was like, I wonder if she has a story. So I just did the thing where you sit in front of a blank screen, and I got the IMAX, so it's a big blank screen. So I was just sitting there, I was like, I wonder if she does. And she didn't have an outline. Jo's had a total outline. I just wrote hers from just, let's go, let's see what's here. And then I found that I was getting the voices mixed up. So I just went back and wrote all of Jo's. Now that I knew that she had a story, then I wrote all of hers, and then I pieced them together that way. So that's how that came about. But I had a full outline for Jo. Obviously I didn't stick to it because I just went off the rails, but I always outline and then I never stick to it. So that's, yeah, that's how.
Yeah, that's interesting. With the evolution I was talking about, the short story collection, that also started as one story. And then it all became like, yeah. Is it a thing where you write a story like that as a short story, and then is it the characters that mean so much to you that you want to follow them and do more with them? Or like, what prompted you to want to expand that into a novel?
Mostly other people telling me that this was a novel. This is not a short story.
Yeah.
And I had lots to go on, because it's inspired by my dad's life. He was a berry picker, him and his family in the fields of Maine in the 60s and 70s. So I had lots of stuff to go off of, and my dad actually took me down to the berry fields, showed me everything, and told me how everything worked. So And I was like, okay. And then I sat down with one mentor who said, you should probably write about that. And I sat down with another mentor who said, you should probably write about that. So I wrote about that.
Yeah. Any other questions?
It also helped I had deadlines because I was using it as my thesis for Institute for American Indian Arts. So I had deadlines. So I was like, okay, now I have to write a chapter. Let's do this. So that helps.
Yeah, deadlines are the great motivator.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I don't have
For
one, I'm
sure.
total slacker. But yeah, deadlines are great.
They are a great motivator, yeah. I have any questions out there? Any more questions? I have a couple more that I could. Okay. So, where's my, oh yeah, I want to talk a little bit about angry white Indians.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but it seems like it would be, in an odd way, fun to write that.
It was fun to write.
Yeah, because you get to like really expose these like very ignorant but very typical attitudes that people have towards.
Yeah. That story, the first part of it is true.
Which is, I was gonna ask that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I used to work in Indigenous governance and stuff. So I was traveling to all the communities in Atlantic Canada. And I was traveling to Elsie Hopetok for a meeting. And I had to stay at this like motel in the middle of nowhere that had one of those like restaurants where you stick to the floor and they have those tacky neon dream catchers tacked to the wall. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was just me there because it was like a Wednesday and there was 3 older gentlemen sitting at the end of the bar and they were talking about their wasted tax dollars on the useless Indians from the res and they were talking about this and then one of them looked at me and went like I was going to agree with them. Right? Because they don't know I'm white passing. My mom is white, so thanks, Mom. So they wanted me to agree with them, and I was kind of like shocked by that. Like,
yeah,
you can have you can't even have those opinions anyway. And I just got up and left. I got uncomfortable. I got a little bit angry. I paid my bill and I left. Left my soggy hamburger. I just left. In the story, I don't leave. So I redeemed myself through literature.
Is that? Yeah, I was going to ask that. So,
Yeah.
The whole collection reads authentically. Like this story in particular, when I read it, I thought, I bet that happened.
Yeah.
And I also love that literature is a conduit for us to be able to experience, to do things we wish we would have done.
Yes.
And so I was going to ask if that note that the person leaves behind in the story actually is a note that you left behind, but you wish you would have left behind.
I wish I would have left behind. I was before this whole writing thing, I was super shy. I'm like, I spent all my time alone with a dog and a cat. And I used to black out doing these things. I don't do that anymore. But yeah, so I just wouldn't have said anything then. But if that happened to me now, oh, there'd be notes, there'd be words, I think.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
But back then I was still kind of like, oh my God. And I think I was shocked by it that people still have. I mean, it was like 2013, 2014 when I was doing this. So it's just like, I can't believe people still talk that way. Although Facebook right now, a whole bunch of guys showed up in Cape Breton at a Halloween party last night dressed as the Ku Klux Klan. So you just never know.
Oh my Lord.
So
I mean, there's a lot of great things about this country.
Yeah, but
a lot of work to do.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yes, there is. But yeah, that story was actually fun to write because I was
Right.
just like, you.
I feel like today you might not even leave a note. You might just say that.
Oh, I probably would. I would stand up and be like, I don't think so. This is how it actually goes.
There are moments where we realize that there is so much work to do. I won't belabor like my experience, but I was in Kingston for the Writers Festival recently, and I was just hanging out in the hotel lobby waiting for an Uber order, and I got like pretty much accosted by these maintenance guys from the hotel because the front desk staff wanted them to ask me if I was staying at the hotel or if I was homeless.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was the only brown guy in the lobby.
Yeah.
There's so many other people there, and they approached me to do that. So that stuff still happens, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what I got from that story too, is like this stuff actually happens. It's not, in a way, it's obviously like it's a fiction, but there's a lot of truth.
There's a lot of
in
truth.
Fiction.
There is a lot of these were based on stories gifted to me from other people. Like Ashes is my friend Jessie Hemphill, her community out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
That actually happened to them. So yeah, some of them were gifted to me by other people, and I'm grateful every day for that.
Yeah. I wanted to, I have a lot more to go over, including Waiting, which is a residential school story, which is a very powerful story. In Waiting, I guess I will, because I love the way in which you incorporate the dough in that story, and almost use it as a way to emulate a lot of our creation stories, or our traditional stories that explain how things are in the world.
Right.
And do you want to? And then you follow that up with a raven story, which is an actual creation story that you're retelling.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting to kind of to tell your own creation story in a way of it's almost like I read it as like how the dough got its spots or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you follow that with an actual one that you're retelling. I just wondering about like that approach and the decision to do that and to follow one with the other.
Right. Again, the order was not not my making.
Right.
But with the dough, because she's representative of the sister, right? So it's kind of like the there's no difference between the natural world and who we are.
Yeah.
It's kind of like going towards that. She's a representative of something he's lost. And then the crow story, that's just my aunt tells that story, and I asked her if I could tell it in my own voice.
Right.
And I just really enjoyed that. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
I mean, you kind of did. Yeah. I just thought it was interesting, like how you have this, this story that is, very powerful residential school story, incorporating the imagery of the dough. Yeah. And explaining how the dough got its spots and this and that. I thought it was just very cool how you followed that up. Yeah, almost like you were creating your own creation story. Yeah. You followed up with like an actual one that you've been told. Yeah, with the crow, yeah. Mm-hmm. I never thought about that. I know, I'm gonna think about that now. This is what happens when I do these things. I'm like, I didn't intend to do that, but that is very cool. Look how smart I am. I don't even know what I'm doing. Oh, you're smart. No. We have time, maybe. Any more questions? No? Okay.
Everybody's so quiet.
Yeah.
Oh, you have.
Oh, Kate has a good.
I just want to know what the story is that you don't like.
I'll tell you later. I'll tell you over dinner.
So that's interesting. I thought that the arrangement of stories was so brilliant. And it's really interesting to hear that. I mean, you must have had some hand in it.
Yeah. So Kate also had some hand in it, because
she's pretty smart.
Yeah, when we did the when you did, you were like, this is really important. This is where I found out that it was important how they were ordered. And then my editor was like, okay, we still need to do more work on it. It's like, okay, so I kept sending her back a list. I would just take the Word document of the table of contents, and I would move it around. And finally, after like the fourth time in like 3 weeks, she's like, that's it. I was like, okay. And the first story and the last story were always there, because like I said, I wanted those to be the first and the last. Yeah. But everything else was just a matter of making sure we weren't going to bore the reader with too much of the same theme right in a row. And then we have these short ones, so that if you read this really, and if it's a heavy story, like 3 Billion Heartbeats, maybe there's something a little bit lighter afterwards, to bring you back to not living in grief. So yeah, there was just so much to it. It was really interesting process. But I did have, I did do it, but it was just going back and forth, basically saying, nope, not yet. And then I would move you around. Nope, not yet. And then she was just like, that's it. I was like, okay, great, here we go.
Yeah, those revelatory moments.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just there, I guess. I love those moments though, when you just get it, when you're writing and you're like, oh yes, that's perfect. Yeah. Not perfect, obviously, but yeah.
I mean, as close as we get.
Yeah. And it's like a natural high, right? When you that sentence is just like, ooh, I love that sentence.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart when the editor goes, Nope. But
Well, I mean, that's I mean, we go on about editing.
yeah,
One of these things doesn't belong, even though it's like the best thing you've written. It's like, it doesn't fit.
yeah, and then I take them out and have like documents of all my favorite things that have been cut.
Have you ever reused them?
I do
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
So like I know that there's a quote somewhere that I really liked from a story I wrote 6 years ago. Let's go find that.
Yeah,
And that's a way to waste 6 hours.
yeah.
And not write your new novel.
Yeah. It's like almost like looking for a meme you like that you can't find.
Yes,
Scroll
yeah,
until you-
scroll, just so you don't have to sit down in front of a blank computer screen.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you everybody for that, and thanks to Amanda for that. This book is incredible. Pick up a copy, and I think we have some. Charlene, I think, is going to come up and give some closing remarks, and then. But thanks everybody for coming out for
Yes,
Amanda.
thanks for having me. Allow you.
That's so rude of me.
Me?
Oh my God, that's the first time I've ever done that.
Who has their phone turned
I
on?
know it wasn't me
So
because I
embarrassed.
keep mine on do not disturb 24/7, much to the
Just
chagrin
shows
of
me
my
how,
family.
how unpopular I am, and that's the first time a sound came from my phone when it wasn't on mute.
I'm so glad all of you came today. I think we could all give a raucous round of applause to these two. Such a treat to hear two writers talk about writing as well as talking about content in a book, but to hear you sort of share a little bit about your decision-making processes and the surprises. And I think it helps us to sort of get a glimpse as readers in some ways of how active reading is also to the creative process. And so we just get a little window into maybe what your strategies are, but also then what our strategies can be as we're reading. And I guess I'm thinking, I'm going to take home with me this idea about writing, especially maybe from a child's point of view. That's what has been I'm thinking about since the start of this conversation, how when a child is looking at something they don't understand, there's a kind of openness and curiosity, and there's not a bunch of preconceptions about what stuff means or how to interpret. And I feel like the writing that you're offering, Amanda, is a kind of invitation to come at understanding worlds, maybe from a more childlike, open position, so that we can take in experience that we may not have had, or that we may have had and need an externalized voice to help us cope with or understand or grieve or laugh about. So I'm really delighted and feel enriched by this conversation. So thank you so much for this beautiful book and for this wonderful conversation, Amanda and David. I would also like to make one more thanks to our host, McNally Robertson Booksellers, possibly the best store in the universe. I'm pretty sure I haven't been to all the planets yet, but I think it's quite likely, who offer us this really beautiful place to gather and to hear new stories and to find new books and have a community. And I understand that John, who is usually performing as the Wizard of Oz, is out with COVID, so that's not very good. But thank you. I didn't get your name. Daniel, for being a very good surrogate Wizard of Oz. Don't you think you did a great job? Now I invite you to meet Amanda here at the signing table. You can get books signed before you go to the cash desk, but you do have to go to the cash desk before you exit the store. That's just how they do it here. Thank you all for coming, and I'll invite you to the last of our series for the fall that we do in tandem with McNally Robinson happens on November 8th, which is a Friday, and we are really excited to host John Elizabeth Stintsey, who's an amazing writer who has some roots here in Winnipeg as well. Thank you for coming. Happy Sunday.